All right, so thank you for coming back. If you don't know already, this is part 2 of a larger series where I deconstruct the French Dispatch. If you haven't seen part 1, please go back and watch it. This is a very dense film, and there's a lot of context that I think is super relevant that comes up in the obituary and the cycling reporter. So if you haven't seen part 1, go see part 1. But if you have seen part 1, I'm just going to jump right into the next episode. Here we go. The Concrete Masterpiece. I think this next part of the story touches more heavy-handedly on the idea of liberty. It's about freedom from oppression through expression. An artist locked away and constrained finds liberty through art, and the journalist who takes liberties with her subject, making for an altogether more significant piece of journalism. Moses Rosenthaler, like his biblical counterpart Moses, was born upper class and then walked away from all of it. People born into privilege sometimes have these kinds of social expectations and pressures set on them that can feel constraining and restrictive. And that's not to say like, oh boo, you grew up with money, you poor thing, right? But like, as Lil Dicky says, it was a different kind of trap.
We just had a different kind of trap. Elaborate.
Not so much fighting for your next meal and trying to figure out, who can you trust and, learning all the horrible things about life from the jump, but rather feeling like you have no freedom to explore. You have no freedom to define yourself and understand who you are. And that leads to a very inward search for meaning that I think leads to the birth of a lot of artists. So when Moses Rosenthaler loses his place in society, he's in a way liberated. Now for this piece, I actually reached out to my brother who works in fine art and has been classically trained at that's not a word. He's been classically trained at the Atelier Academy, and I want to reach out to him and just get his whole take on this thing. And to me, it actually makes a ton of sense because it's like a perspective that I don't have. I'm not really an artist. I'm like a content creator, but let's not bullshit ourselves. We're not artists here, okay? So I brought in my brother, who has a strong understanding of art history and a strong understanding of the things that go into creating fine art. And here's what he had to say about the Concrete Masterpiece.
So Moses, the character in the French Dispatch, was born into high society, born into a lot of money, which explains his high-class interest in representational painting, which I would say that Moses could loosely be based on, the biblical Moses being cast down from high society. I think upper-class people are usually a little bit more rigid, a little bit more structured in their temperament. He's cast into the world as like this migrating, traveling artist trying to make it, and all the time living on the edge of homelessness and kind of suffering until, for whatever reason, there's, you could argue however many different ways the reasons why, but he commits a murder and he's put into a prison. From there, in the prison, he doesn't work for 12 years or whatever it is. When he's in prison, he essentially gives up being an artist. He essentially gives up being a painter. But he realized his life has absolutely no meaning. So he's on the edge of a suicide, hence the reason why he feels like he needs to keep his hands moving. And I think keeping his hands moving is crucial here. He's not saying he's going to make a work of art. He's saying that he's trying to survive, whether inside or outside of prison, which leads me to a point about Moses. Him and his muse, Simone, never refer to him as an artist. He, in my opinion, almost isn't an artist. He's a person attempting to survive, and like by moving the only way for him to feel like he can survive is by moving his hands. I guess you could call it expressing himself, but I feel like he's basically just living and he's moving. And it's funny when the art collector comes in, sees his work. The art collector and that whole side of this story is like the most like satirical aspect of it, because they essentially make up a story about him. They're like, oh, he can do this, a pristine pigeon or whatever it is, but he chooses to work like this. I don't think Moses would see it that way. And I think what that kind of speaks to is the fact that Moses is not his work. And I think that's really punctuated when he asks Simone to marry him early on and his relationship with Simone. Simone doesn't give a shit about Moses. She gives a shit about the work. The work is what the world needs. Moses is not what the world needs. Hence his confinement, the fact that he's literally a murderer. But Simone continues to deny him as a person, but he does not deny him as like one who creates or one who brings forth something into the world. To answer your thoughts or your question more directly, I think that like with the freedom outside of prison, he was more in a prison than he was when he's in the prison. Like his drive isn't to like find freedom or express himself while he's in prison, right? I think the drive is to survive, and I don't think he could survive on the outside. And I think he needed the confinement for the best of himself to come out.
So, like the angry boys of the church in the cycling report that grounds us in this world, the story deals with how a misfit in society, confined by some kind of social structure or social norm, has an inner self longing to be free. And so a psychopathic killer emerges from within him, and that lands him in jail. It's here where the theme of captivity is very much in your face, but more importantly than this, his oppression is the way others around him develop a relationship with him and use him. Every relationship that he has is in some way an oppressive relationship, right? You've got Simone, who acts as his muse within the walls of the prison. But what's inspiring about her to him isn't the support that she offers him or even love. It's actually quite the opposite. She kind of makes him feel like shit. She does love him in her own fucked up way, but in the end, she kind of just makes off with a small fortune from royalties, and she never treats him with care or love or, any kind of nurturing behavior. She's just constantly being oppressive towards him because she knows that it's through oppression that his best art is going to emerge. Then you've got the art dealer, Julien Cardazio. The art dealer, he's like an armchair art critic who doesn't know much about the meaning or the pain or the deeper emotional trauma that motivates Rosenthaler. All he understands is that Moses' story is something that he can sell to make himself rich. He's not inspired by the beauty that emerges from the pain or the expression that emerges from oppression. He just wants to be on the bleeding edge of the emerging art market and uses Rosenthaler to get him there. Then finally, quietly, and yet I think most importantly, is the way in which J.K.L. Berenson, played by Tilda Swinton, uses Rosenthaler. Which is, I think maybe a weird choice of words, right? Like, she uses him to understand him. But it's a true choice of words because she's a journalist. Her job is to understand him, and the best way to do that is to be with him. It's this affair and the way that she engaged Rosenthaler sexually that makes her arguably the best person to narrate this story, because by sharing human experiences with him, she understands the man behind the art and the emotional pain and oppression that led to such a renowned artist in this fictional world. Now, ethically, that kind of behavior today would have had her story pulled from any major publication because it calls into question the integrity of her work. But at the French Dispatch, her analysis of Rosenthaler's work is made all the better for it. And I think Howitzer knows this, which is why he doesn't react negatively when Berenstain tells him about the affair that she had with her subject. He knows that it's going to lead to a better piece at the end of the day. It's going to lead to something that's more honest and truthful of the human that the story is about. And I think that's a great segue into the next story, Revisions to a Manifesto. And that'll be covered in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in again for Media Matters. Like I said, this is part 2 of a larger series. So if you haven't seen part 1, go watch part 1. Make sure you're subscribed and you have the bell icon clicked so that you can tune in for the next episode. So if you're interested in this, if you're interested in dissecting the French Dispatch with me, make sure to subscribe, make sure to tune in, make sure to have that bell icon clicked. Thank you so much.